Quem somos? O que buscamos? A One apresenta o núcleo técnico operacional do maior centro de diagnóstico em genômica da América Latina. Somos especializados em exames genéticos de alta complexidade e medicina personalizada. Oferecemos o melhor da medicina diagnóstica para nossos pacientes e contamos com uma equipe de especialistas em genômica, biologia molecular e bioinformática. Temos à nossa disposição o que há de mais inovador para aumentar a efetividade do tratamento e qualidade de vida dos pacientes. Contamos com equipamentos de amplificação e sequenciamento de última geração e metodologia de análise avançada. O nosso compromisso é trazer um diagnóstico de precisão com excelência. Trabalhamos juntos para entregar sempre o melhor resultado, porque aqui cada paciente é único. Você é a nossa razão de existir.
Bom, gente, boa noite a todos. Eu queria inicialmente agradecer a presença de todos aqui, mesmo que seja uma presença virtual, muito em moda, né, em tempos de pandemia. Eu acredito muito nesse tipo de transmissão de conhecimento via web, principalmente porque a gente tem a condição de ter pessoas, como é o caso do Brandon, aqui agora, né? Quer dizer, ele está lá na Filadélfia e está passando aí informações para a gente aqui no Brasil. Isso, claro, minimiza custos, viabiliza, né, uma aula como essa. Muitas das vezes, momentos como esse não seriam possíveis, ou antes mesmo da pandemia, né, o custo às vezes se torna alto para se fazer coisas como essa. Então, assim, para que todos entendam, né, essa é uma iniciativa da Cromossome, Medicina Genômica, que é gestada pela One, né, o braço de genômica da DASA, e em parceria aí com o Centro de Estudos de dois grandes amigos, a qual eu já participei algumas vezes. Eles têm, se tem aulas, né, para se ter uma ideia, essa seria toda última quinta do mês. O Luiz Eduardo e a Maria Eugênia aí, eles algum tempo depois eles vão comentar um pouquinho sobre isso. Eles falam aí, discutem, né? Tem pelo menos uma reunião mensal, que seria a última quinta do mês, e agora a gente uniu forças um pouquinho antes da pandemia para que a gente comece a ter momentos como esse, né? Comece a trazer pessoas como o Brenton ou outras em si para discutir os temas mais atuais ou até mesmo discussão de casos clínicos. Eu acho muito produtivo. Eu queria publicamente parabenizar a iniciativa do Luiz e da Maria Eugênia, né, pelo grupo de estudos. E eu queria que eles comentassem cada um pouquinho, né, se apresentasse. Muitos aqui já conhecem, obviamente, né? Mas o objetivo aí do grupo de estudos. E depois eu dou uma pinceladinha no que o Brenton vai falar em português, para que depois o pessoal que ouça, né, em inglês já tenha uma boa noção do que ele está falando. Então eu vou começar pela Maria Eugênia. Maria Eugênia, com você a palavra.
Bom, boa noite. Muito bom a gente se ver, né, depois desse períodozinho aí que a gente está tentando se organizar. Brandon, tudo bem para você? Você acompanhou o português? Dá para acompanhar? Ou a gente pode... Você consegue acompanhar?
Sim, sim.
Ok. Esse grupo foi uma iniciativa da gente, assim, tanto do ponto de vista científico quanto do ponto de vista ético, da gente se fortalecer e se ajudar. Foi um grupo que começou com o nome de Grupo de Estudos em Infertilidade. Nós começamos com 8, 10 participantes, assim, um grupo pequeno, e em 5 ou 6 meses a gente está em torno de 70 a 80 participantes. Foi um grupo que cresceu muito rápido, e é um grupo que é bastante alinhado do ponto de vista de novas propostas, do ponto de vista de novas descobertas e do que a gente pode oferecer de melhor para os nossos pacientes. E então, tudo que acontece de highlights, tudo que acontece de novidade, ou mesmo o que não é tão novo, né? A gente começou as primeiras reuniões do grupo com temas básicos, a gente começou com propedêutica, e aí a gente foi crescendo. A maior parte do grupo é o pessoal de velha guarda, o pessoal que já tá aí na estrada há um tempão, né, um pouquinho de tempo. E aí tem os residentes que estão chegando também. Enfim, é um grande privilégio poder compartilhar momentos de estudo, de troca de ideias e, enfim, de novas possibilidades com esse grupo. Eu me sinto muito privilegiada de fazer parte desse grupo.
Desculpa, Maria Eugênia, eu acabei não te apresentando por completo. A Maria Eugênia é médica ginecologista e obstetra, coordenadora do ambulatório de planejamento familiar lá no Pérola Byton, né, Maria Eugênia?
Sim, sim. Eu faço paciente
e também instrutora médica da graduação na Faculdade de Medicina do Einstein e diretora da clínica
Esfera Saúde. Esfera Saúde.
Esfera Saúde. Perfeito. Agora eu queria passar a palavra para o Luiz. O Luiz, a gente já se conhece aí um bom tempo, né, Luiz? Bastante tempo. Já teve bastante oportunidade de parcerias, não só científicas, enfim. O meio de reprodução humana é um meio muito pequeno, né, Luiz? Eu costumo dizer que as pessoas, mesmo não se conhecendo de conversar, é mais ou menos aquela história de amigo de Facebook, né? Quer dizer, se conhece de alguma forma. O Luiz também é obstetra, né, Luiz? O Luiz é o fundador, diretor da Fet Vitro, não é isso? E atualmente conta um pouquinho, Luiz, aí do teu trabalho e um pouquinho do grupo de estudos aí.
Bom, primeiro, boa noite a todos. Eu gostaria de agradecer a presença de todos. Como a Eugênia falou, um grupo que começou pequenininho, né? Porque nós temos que lembrar que nós fazíamos uma reunião presencial, né? Que hoje está muito difícil disso acontecer, né? E tudo surgiu pelo interesse da Eugênia, a gente conversando, fizemos uma palestra em pouquíssimas pessoas, e depois tivemos uma pressãozinha de alguns residentes do Hospital Pérola Byton, o qual eu trabalho no Hospital Pérola Byton, no setor de reprodução humana, de fertilidade conjugal, e aí nós resolvemos ampliar um pouco mais do que a reunião do Hospital Pérola Byton, né? Então resolvemos fazer numa quinta-feira, uma por mês, e a ideia realmente é trazer ou alguma coisa nova ou mesmo trocar experiência. Na verdade, o que a gente mais faz é trocar experiência, né? Que é sempre bom a gente trocar experiência, porque a gente não sabe tudo, ninguém sabe tudo, e a melhor coisa realmente é cada um apresentar a sua experiência. Então, esse foi o objetivo e é isso que a gente faz, né? Quer dizer, se reúne toda quinta-feira última do mês e discute ou um tema novo, como esse o caso, ou discute trabalho científico, ou discute discussão de casos, a gente reserva para discussão de casos. Então, isso aqui é interessante e aproveita para rever os amigos, né? E agora vamos ver os amigos virtualmente, o que é muito bom.
Exato, aquele abraço caloroso virtualmente, né?
Sem dúvida.
Só para complementar, então, o Luiz é mestre em ginecologia pela Unifesp, título de especialista em ginecologia, certificado na área de atuação e reprodução humana pela Febrasgo, médico do setor de reprodução humana do Hospital Pérola Byton, de vez em quando a gente se encontra lá, e diretor médico aí do Centro de Reprodução Humana Fet Vitro, fica localizado em São Paulo. Antes de introduzir o Brandon, para aqueles que ainda não conhecem a tecnologia, né? Quer dizer, hoje nós sabemos que é possível, através da retirada de algumas células do embrião, o qual a gente chama isso de biópsia, né? A gente tira aí de 5 a 10 células do embriãozinho, que após a fecundação do óvulo e espermatozoide, chega ao 5º dia, e ali é um embrião com umas centenas de células, se tira de 5 a 10 células para uma análise, para se fazer o cariótipo, entre aspas, né, molecular, desse embrião, com o objetivo de dizer se esse embrião é euploide ou aneuploide. Né? O euploide aí é o normal, o aneuploide teria uma anormalidade genética, cromossômica, né? A qual é a principal causa de abortamento, né? Mais de 50% dos abortamentos aí são de causa cromossômica. Obviamente, usualmente são erros da natureza, não costuma se repetir, a não ser em pacientes principalmente acima de 36 anos de idade, né? Então, o objetivo, né, que a gente chama de PGT, que é o teste genético pré-implantacional, de aneuploidia, que é feita através dessa análise, existem algumas discussões, né, sobre o tema, depois a gente pode discutir um pouquinho mais no final sobre isso, né, sobre a biópsia do embrião, é um procedimento invasivo, né? Antigamente a gente biopsiava o embrião em 3º dia, nem imaginava na época que ia biopsiar em 5º, não imaginava que tinha vitrificação, né? Eu costumo mostrar, Luísa, não sei se você ou a Maria Eugênia chegaram, sabem? Não sei se chegaram a participar, obviamente, mas os ovos eram colhidos por laparotomia, né? Não era nem vídeo ainda. E hoje, se você pensar isso, você fala, nossa, que absurdo, né? Se a gente olhar 10 anos para trás, realmente a gente dá muito risado do que é medicina, mas é o que se tinha, né? Então, tendo em vista a análise embrionária, e se isso pode causar um dano ao embrião, alguns estudos mostram que não há ganho com a análise, outros mostram que há ganho, possivelmente a habilidade da biópsia, ou não se enquadra dentro daquela filosofia, dentro daquela clínica. Então, talvez esse teste que é feito de uma forma não invasiva, né? Quer dizer, se pega esse meio de cultura, o qual o embriãozinho fica ali nadando durante 5 dias, e através do DNA livre é feito uma amplificação desse DNA e é feito análise desse DNA dos 24 cromossomos ou dos 23 pares. Então, por teoria, né, é uma técnica extremamente oportuna, né, Luiz, principalmente, e Maria Eugênia, pelo fato de não precisar biopsiar o embrião, não precisar dessa habilidade da biópsia em si. É importante salientar que ainda não é uma técnica de rotina, é uma técnica que a gente deve estar oferecendo dentro do grupo, a cromossoma, ali dentro da Dinuan, da DASA. Já era para estar a rotina, mas a pandemia, né, tirou um pouquinho vários eventos aí, enfim. Mas a questão toda é importante salientar que o PGT ainda, por biópsia, ainda é o gold standard, mas que é uma técnica promissora, principalmente por ela ser, eventualmente, o Brandon vai falar isso na aula, vocês vão ver, que ela eliminaria aqueles mosaicos de baixo mosaico, o qual não teria prejuízo ao embrião, e esses embriões se desenvolviam normalmente. Então, a grande jogada toda é a especificidade, porque sensibilidade, o Brandon vai falar do método de amplificação exclusivo deles, da Yikon, que é um método que eles desenvolveram em parceria com a Harvard. Quer dizer, esse é o grande pulo do gato. Agora, se o embriologista por trás que fazia biópsia, né, não tivesse seus devidos cuidados, ele vai contaminar com células próprias, com célula de granulosa, de espermatozoide, se não for uma X, etc, etc. Isso, claro, precisaria de um treinamento específico, mas o que eu quero mostrar para vocês é que pode ser uma técnica logo entra em rotina nos laboratórios, por conta de que o workflow é muito enxuto, não exige muito do embriologista, muito tempo. O Brento vai explicar isso passo a passo. E os estudos já estão mostrando ser bem promissores, especialmente hoje a utilização, né? Você fala assim, mas já que não está substituindo, qual que é a utilidade? É nas clínicas as quais não tem uma rotina grande de biópsia e que o paciente eventualmente queira um screening desse, ela pode ser feita, né? Porque não há necessidade de grande habilidade do embriologista. Então, é mais ou menos essa linha de pensamento. Eu vou apresentar o Brenton agora para vocês, né? O Brenton é vice-presidente da empresa Yikon, que é uma empresa chinesa, qual agora meio que se naturalizou americana, mas é a única empresa no mundo atualmente, até onde eu sei, que está oferecendo esse tipo de teste, né? Brenton, I'd like to say again, that's a great pleasure to have here again to talk about this new technology, right?
Yes.
Exciting technology, technology for the future. But of course, you're going to show us that this technology are using in some routine from some labs around the world, right? And probably will be routine in Brazil in the future. So,
yes, absolutely.
Thank you again for joining us this evening.
Yes.
And you have take your time. You have something around 50 minutes to a presentation, but a little more if you need. Okay.
No problem. Great. Well, thank you very much to all of you for having me. It's my pleasure to be able to speak with all of you tonight. And I usually travel to Brazil very often. I miss Brazil. I look forward to being able to travel again, and but I'm very happy to be able to join all of you through Zoom tonight. So I will share my screen so I can project the presentation. One moment. You can see my presentation, correct? Yeah. Okay. So I would like to take time to speak with you about non-invasive PGTA and why it is the future of embryo screening. The basic structure of what I will show you is a brief overview of why we developed this technology and ultimately how it's being used today. So as everybody knows, my screen isn't working well. So just as everyone knows, the original way of selecting embryos for transfer was morphologically, by looking at what the embryos looked like, choosing them based upon their morphological grade, and selecting them for transfer. After the morphological technique was used, then PGTA became, or back then PGS became widely used, where utilizing the biopsy to analyze the chromosomal structure of the embryo. But back in the late, maybe around 2009 or 2010, Yikon's two co-founders, Sijia Liu and Sunny Xia at Harvard University, they developed a technology that would enable them to eventually offer a non-invasive PGTA solution. And the reason that they developed it was because in China at that time, there were 1 million IVF cycles per year, which is a huge number. There were 1 million IVF cycles, but there were only around 1,000 PGTA cases being performed every year. So that was a huge difference, with 1 million cycles to only have 1,000 PGTA cases being performed. And the reason is because in China, the IVF care and the fertility care is centered in just a few hospitals. So it's not like in Brazil or in the United States, where there's multiple clinics throughout the country or private clinics throughout the country. Everything is concentrated to central hospitals. So that made it very difficult to perform PGTA because of the amount of work that would be required from the embryologists to, in one location, perform PGTA for millions of cycles. So the intention of the co-founders of Yikon was to develop a technology that would be a non-invasive way to perform PGTA by using the DNA in the spent culture media from the embryo culturing process. Because if they would be able to develop that, it would not only be a safer way to test the embryo, but it would also be a way to provide PGTA to more people, because it wouldn't require biopsying. It wouldn't require senior embryologists to perform the technique. And ultimately, it would make it readily available to people throughout the world, no matter where they are. And I look at specific cases in Brazil, for example, for IVF centers who may not, up until this point, have been able to offer PGTA because of lack of an embryologist to perform biopsies, or maybe not enough embryologists in a certain area. This technology answers that problem as well, because it makes it possible to perform PGTA whether or not you have a senior embryologist on staff, or whether or not you have someone at a satellite location to perform PGTA biopsies. You no longer would have to do that because you have access to testing the DNA in the culture media. So the founders of Yikon developed a technique called Malbach, which stands for, it stands for multiple annealing looping based amplification cycle. What it is a DNA amplification technology that, instead of amplifying DNA as a linear amplification, where you're making copies of the copies of DNA, it actually makes copies of the original DNA. And think about it this way: if you took a picture of yourself and put it on a photocopying machine, and you made 1 million copies of that photo, but you did it by making a copy of every single copy, by the time you got to 1 million copies, the photo would not be recognizable because pieces of that photo, the pixels, would be lost. Well, if you made 1 million copies of a photo of yourself by making copies of the original photo every time, then you would actually have a very consistent image for all 1 million of those copies. And that's exactly what Yikon developed with Malbach, is an amplification technology that makes copies of the original DNA, and it leads to, it has a very low allele dropout rate and provides a very thorough coverage of the genome. And when you're working with highly fragmented DNA, like DNA that's in culture media from an embryo, you have such a small amount of DNA, often as little as 1 picogram of DNA, that if you amplify DNA with a technology that has a high allele dropout rate, you'll lose so much of the genome that the data won't be reliable. The DNA that you're looking at won't be reliable. And when you may only have 1 or 2 copies of the genome in fragmented pieces in a culture media, losing even like 5% of that could cause you to not get results. So what Yikon developed was this amplification technology to specifically work with DNA that is in the culture media from an embryo. So they started out doing some research, utilizing the technique by looking at the blastocele fluid. We worked with Dr. Gianroli, with Santiago Minet back then as well, looking at different ways, looking at different studies of where DNA was present. Was there sufficient DNA in the blastocele fluid, or was it better to use the DNA in the culture media? We did several studies looking at these different sources of DNA. So after a couple papers were published looking at the blastocele fluid, we also then began looking at the DNA that was present in the culture media to test whether or not the culture media by itself would be a better source of genomic DNA than the blastocele fluid. So we began doing more research on how to capture the DNA in the culture media. And we developed NICS. We developed the non-invasive chromosome screening technique. And it's a very straightforward process, actually. We discovered in these early stages back in 2015 that there was sufficient DNA in the culture media to be able to perform PGTA. And what was interesting about that is we began analyzing the DNA to see whether or not that DNA was actually coming from the embryo or if it was contamination. We didn't know at that point. But what we were able to do is, in our initial studies, which led to the first paper that we published, we discovered that by lysing the whole embryo, by sequencing the whole embryo, and doing initial concordance studies, we discovered that the DNA in the culture media was actually concordant with the whole embryo, had a high concordancy with the whole embryo, which showed that the DNA from the embryo was in fact being shed into the culture media. It's a mystery of why that is, but what was interesting is that there was sufficient DNA to perform the study. So what we did is we launched a study to look at the actual concordance data, and we took ICSI embryos and we cultured them, and we took the whole embryo, the whole blast, we lysed the whole blastocyst, and then we also collected the culture media and we compared those results. And this is our first paper that was published in 2016. What you can see is in this first paper, the numbers are actually very, very strong numbers. The sensitivity was 88.2%, specificity was 84%, PPV was 78.9%, and the NPV was 91.3%, which is by itself is actually really good because those numbers are higher than regular PGTA. And this was only back in 2016 in our first design of non-invasive screening. But this wasn't good enough, because what we believed, what our hypothesis was, is that the DNA in the culture media is, or should be, representative of the whole embryo and have a very high concordance rate, and even have a negative predictive value of close to 100%. Because if the DNA is truly coming from the whole embryo, you should have much higher sensitivities, specificities, PPVs, and NPVs. So we decided, sorry, my screen isn't shifting. There we go. So what we did, sorry, one moment. So what we did is we decided that we finished validating the test in the first version of the non-invasive PGTA, and we enrolled patients in the first clinical usage of NICs. And with the belief that the non-invasive PGTA would give more accurate results. And the reason that what we had been able to show is that when you're looking at TE biopsies, for example, there's always a problem of mosaicism. So you may be biopsying cells that are euploid cells, but maybe the whole embryo is mosaic, but you're biopsying cells that say it's euploid, or maybe you're biopsying cells that say the embryo is aneuploid, but in reality, they were just mosaic cells. And the non-invasive PGTA is actually designed to eliminate the problem of false negatives due to mosaicism, because you are getting a more accurate representation of the whole embryo. So with this in mind, what we did, and this was back in 2016, there was a couple who had gone through 3 IVF cycles. The wife had premature ovarian failure, the husband had a translocation, they had failed previous cycles, and they wanted to try one more time. And this was in cooperation with the Wuxi Children's Maternal Hospital, who enrolled this patient, or this couple, in our study for them to be the first couple to ever try non-invasive PGTA. So they agreed that for any embryos that were aneuploid, they would donate the whole embryo for research so that we could compare the whole embryo with the non-invasive results. So they had three embryos that reached blast stage. And you can see here in embryo 1 and embryo 2, you can see the results of the medium showed that you can see that these, I'm sorry, let me go back. The medium 1 showed that this embryo was aneuploid. And the video screen is in the way of my my presentation. One second, I have to move it so I can see the data. Okay, that's better. So you can see here that the medium from embryo 1 and was aneuploid. The medium from embryo 2 was also aneuploid. So they donated these embryos. And what you can see here is when we compared the whole embryo to the results from the culture media, they were concordant, which is fascinating. And it showed that the non-invasive technique was picking up the same chromosomal structure that the whole embryo displayed. And on this third embryo, the medium showed that it was a 46XY embryo. So the patients chose to transfer this embryo, and this was the first non-invasive PGTA baby born in the world in China. And this was all over the news. And it was a huge achievement because this couple who had previously had so many failures. One of the other things that this showed, and can you hear me?
Yeah, now, yes.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah. Great.
So one of the things that we have shown to be important is that when doing a validation or doing a concordance study, it's very important to compare the results of it's important to compare the culture media with the whole embryo. Because if you're not comparing the results from the culture media to the whole embryo, you may just be comparing the culture media to mosaic results. So what we wanted to do as a proof of concept was to show that we had high concordance with the whole embryo. And you look at some of these other papers that were published using non-invasive techniques or non-invasive technologies, and you can see in the cases where whole embryos weren't used, the concordance data was very low. So you can see here in this study, there was very low concordance when comparing culture media to just the TE biopsy. But when comparing culture media to the whole embryo, you can see there were higher concordance rates. Same is true here with this whole embryo result, but very low concordance rates with the TE biopsy results. And I think it just shows that it's very important that when we developed this technology and developed non-invasive PGTA, all of our papers actually compared the whole embryo with the culture media. And that actually makes it possible for us to show that our techniques work and have a high concordance. So that when other laboratories, like DASA, for example, when other laboratories are validating this technology, these laboratories throughout the world can actually validate the test by comparing with the TE biopsies that they currently have, because we've already been able to demonstrate that our kits do have a high concordance with the whole embryo when using that technology.
Sorry, Brandon, I think we have a little break in the sound. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower.
Your image, it's very clear, you know, just the microphone.
Just the microphone.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can fix it.
It's changing in time. I don't know if sometimes it's moving or just.
Hold on, one moment. I'm sorry.
Now it's okay. Now it's much better. Okay, thank you.
Would like to change the equipment or something like that?
Is this better? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So
yeah.
So I'll go back to what I was saying. That it's very important that we have been able to validate using comparing the culture media to the whole embryo. But here are some of the things that make non-invasive chromosome screening, or NICS, more. These are the things that make it accurate. The success rate and accuracy of a non-invasive PGTA are affected by these things. Number one, the sampling strategies. Number two, the whole genome amplification methodologies that are used, the testing platforms, the data analysis, and the comparison reference, like I was just saying with comparing with the whole embryo. The sampling method is really important because this actually will make a difference. This will make the difference between whether or not you can successfully perform the test. If you're not sampling properly, number one, you may not get enough DNA from the culture media, and you may introduce contamination into the process. It's very important that you follow a set of culturing protocols that will allow you to, number one, remove maternal contamination from the embryo. Number two, that will allow you to collect enough DNA in the culture media. And number three, that will prevent you from adding in any additional contamination to the process, such as cross-contamination between embryos. So it's important that we took time to determine what is the right sampling interval. When should you be culturing the embryos until? When should you change out culture media? When should you collect the culture media? And we compared the accuracy of different sampling methods. And what we have seen is that when allowing the embryos, when changing out the culture media on day 4 and allowing the embryos to culture until day 6 or day 7, you have enough DNA in the culture media to have a success rate of 97%, meaning that you have enough DNA in the culture media to successfully get a result. Now, sometimes, or some clinics, you may not want to allow your embryos to, you may not culture your embryos for that long. But in these validation studies, what we've shown is that it's possible, if you do that, you have enough DNA in the culture media. But we have introduced some new protocols that allow you on day 4 to collapse the embryo just with a laser pulse. That when you collapse the embryo and allow it to re-expand, you can then collect the culture media on day 5 and still have a 97% success rate. So these sampling strategies are if you do not collapse the embryo. If you do collapse the embryo, you can collect the culture media earlier and still obtain that 97% success rate. One really interesting thing is one of our largest partners, New Hope Fertility in New York, they've actually built a genetic laboratory in their clinic, and they have converted all of their PGTA business to non-invasive. They do about 400 PGTA cases per month, and it's all non-invasive now. And what they've discovered is for any of the failures, for any samples that didn't have enough DNA in the culture media, they would thaw those embryos, reculture them for 24 hours, collect the culture media, and reanalyze it, and had 100% success rate on those embryos. So they've been able to correct any of the failures by thawing and reculturing them and obtaining 100% success rate in those cases. And I'll actually give an example here of a protocol in action. So you can see that with NICS, with non-invasive PGTA, the steps are identical in the beginning. You know, you have with TE biopsies versus NICS, it's the same for day 0 to day 3. But here's where things begin to change. On day 3, if you perform assisted hatching, you can perform assisted hatching. And then a stripping of the embryo is performed for NICS, because that's helping to remove maternal contamination, additional maternal contamination. So before you change out the media, you perform a stripping, you change the media, you perform a second stripping to get rid of that maternal contamination. And then here is where everything really deviates. On day 3, you're also changing to a different type of dish. Up until day 3, you can culture the embryos together. That's no problem. But on day 3, it's important that the embryos be separated and use a dish like this, like a GPS dish, for example, where you would have an embryo in each well of the dish, where it's making sure you can see it has raised walls on each side, on each well, to make sure that there's no contamination. And with each culturing session, we have you add in a blank control, because we sequence every one of the blank controls as well. So when you send the blank controls into the laboratory, we can determine whether or not there was any contamination introduced in the culturing session itself. So if that control tests positive, it means that there was contamination and none of the results would actually be valid. So we put in several controls into the process to make sure that there is no contamination. So then on day 5 through 7, there's no additional media change. And at this point, you can collapse the embryo, where you allow for the expansion, the collapse and expansion of the embryo. You collect the media and vitrify the embryo. That's an example of a sampling methodology. Now, we've adapted our culturing protocols to different clinics' scenarios, because every clinic is different. But that is just an overview of what has worked very well for several clinics. But for everybody who's listening to this, if this is something that you want to implement in your clinic, we can help customize protocols for you that make sure that you're not introducing more changes than have to be introduced. So the second thing I mentioned on the list of what makes NICS successful, or what makes a successful non-invasive PGTA, is the whole genome amplification methodology. And that's what makes our non-invasive PGTA successful and accurate, is because of that Malbach amplification technology that I mentioned before. What we did in our second version of the test is we created a new version of the reagents that combined amplification and library prep into a single step. For the IVF clinic, this is something that you don't really see on your end, because this is a step that's performed in the laboratory. But for the laboratory performing this test, it saves a significant amount of time. It saves about 10 to 11 hours of hands-on time in the laboratory, which reduces turnaround time, reduces cost, and because amplification and library prep are performed in the same step, it gives an even higher coverage of the genome and an even lower allele dropout rate, which gives you a more accurate test. In addition to improving the reagents, we also improve the analysis platform for bioinformatics. And it is a very straightforward, simple to use process. And Ciro, I'm sure you can attest to that from seeing this in action in the laboratory, where a lot of bioinformatics platforms and softwares take a lot of work to use, where you have to be somewhat familiar with bioinformatics to make it work. We've made a plug and play system that takes the raw sequencing data, and this is what the bioinformatics platform looks like. You upload the data, you choose the test, and you click the button to start, and it analyzes the data and gives you a report. It's very easy and very simple to use. So the analysis platform really does make a difference when choosing a non-invasive when implementing non-invasive PGTA, because this doesn't require any difficult bioinformatics processes. And in addition then to the sampling strategies, the amplification methodologies, the bioinformatics, all of that leads up to having an accurate non-invasive PGTA. So one of our first papers published with our new technology was published by Catherine Rakowski in 2019. She's the president of ASRM now, of the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. And she published a paper comparing the non-invasive PGTA, NICS, with the TE biopsies and the whole embryo for embryos that had been donated for research. And her conclusion is that non-invasive PGTA is less prone to errors associated with embryo mosaicism and is more reliable than TE biopsy PGTA. And you can look up this paper. It's available for you to read. It's fascinating to look through the data. But this is the design of her study. She designed it by doing exactly what we had done in our first validation study, which was comparing the whole embryo to the culture media. And this is the comparison of the performance of the non-invasive versus TE for PGTA. What is really interesting is here, when you look at this, you can see that and this is actually looking at comparing the non-invasive results to the whole embryo and the TE biopsy to the whole embryo. So this is whole embryo concordance data. So you can see here the false positive rate for the culture media was lower than TE biopsy. False negative rate was lower. False negative rate was 0. The positive predictive value was 91.7%, much higher than TE biopsies. The negative predictive value was 100%. Sensitivity, 100%. Specificity was 80% over a 50% concordance. And this is what I think is some of the most important data. The percent concordance for embryo ploidy was 93.8% with the whole embryo when using NICS versus 82% when using the TE biopsy. And this really shows that mosaicism is really a problem when using TE biopsies, because this is showing that the culture media DNA is picking up the true, or the closer to the true chromosomal structure of the embryo. Same here is that there is an 83.3% concordance for chromosome copy numbers, variation. So this, and I think everybody understands what mosaicism is, but this is just a slide to show, and when you're performing the TE biopsy, depending on what cells you collect, you could be collecting cells that are not representative of the whole embryo. And that's why the DNA in spent culture media enables you to look at the aneuploidy status in the ICM and in the TE, because the DNA in a TE biopsy only looks at the ploidy status of the TE. So the the non-invasive PGTA truly is looking at the whole embryo's ploidy status. And the last thing I want to show, I'll skip these slides because they're, yeah, this is the last thing I want to show. One of the other things that we did is, and there's a paper that is published that should come out, I believe is coming out next month, that when it is published, where we studied we conducted a double-blind study where couples who had they had embryos that were chosen morphologically, and all had low-grade embryos, low-grade morphological embryos. What Yikon did is developed, in addition to developing a bioinformatics pipeline for looking at the chromosomal status, they developed an artificial intelligence module as well that looks at the big data from tens of thousands of non-invasive PGTA embryos that have clinical outcome data. And what the AI module does is it looks at the results from NICs, from non-invasive PGTA, and then looks at the big data and looks to see what the clinical outcome was with what the clinical outcome was for embryos that had a similar chromosomal structure. Because, for example, when you get a result that is, like, say, 46XY, you'd say it's a euploid embryo. Well, every embryo is slightly mosaic, right? So just because it says 46XY doesn't mean there's no mosaicism. It just means that all of the mosaicism is underneath the thresholds of detection, or underneath the thresholds where it actually would affect the results of the oops, I lost my screen again. It's underneath the threshold where you would say that something actually is mosaic. But our bioinformatics pipeline still has the information of underlying or segmental mosaicism for every embryo. So it looks at even the euploid embryos and looks at all segmental mosaicism, compares that with the big data, and can say, well, this other embryos who had this type of segmental mosaicism had this clinical outcome. What it allows us to do then is it allows us to prioritize embryos for transfer based upon the AI platform as well. So you may have 4 euploid embryos, but maybe 2 of them have a lower grade in the AI system. So we actually can help you choose embryos. We can help you prioritize even the normal embryos, even the euploid embryos. So this study that we did is these couples who had low-grade morphology for their embryos, they chose to have non-invasive PGTA performed and then analyzed using our AI system. These embryos were then transferred to the patients. The patients didn't know whether or not they were being transferred A, B, or C embryos, but these embryos were transferred, and the clinical outcomes were tracked for these patients. And what you can see is that using our prioritization system, the embryos that we did choose as A priority embryos for transfer did have a higher clinical pregnancy rate, did have a higher ongoing pregnancy rate, and did have a lower miscarriage rate. So it actually shows that in addition to being able to determine the ploidy status of embryos, we can also prioritize the embryos for transfer using the AI system, which helps give you even more confidence in which embryos you're choosing for transfer, and ultimately can deliver a higher clinical pregnancy rate, which is the goal. And actually, we've seen in many of our clinics that we're working with have reported a higher clinical pregnancy rate as a result of using this technology. So this really has allowed for a different approach. Whereas in the past, you would choose based on morphology, you may choose these embryos because they look morphologically, they have a high grade. But then non-invasive PGTA began, and you are able to choose embryos based upon what the actual chromosomal structure of those embryos is. And then you might pick embryos that don't look morphologically sound, but because you can look at the genetic structure, you would choose these embryos. But now, because of this AI system, we can prioritize which of those two embryos you should pick, which of the euploid embryos you should transfer, based upon the underlying or segmental mosaicism, and what embryos that shared that structure, what their clinical outcome was in the past. So what we've been able to do is develop this non-invasive technology and truly make it possible for clinics to have access to PGTA that may not have had access to it before. And we've also made it possible to implement this in countries all over the world. We have the kits to do amplification and library prep and to collect the culture media. And it's a very easy implementation process. And we've really seen a rapid uptake of this technology because of the ease of use, and also because it gives patients a peace of mind knowing that their embryos don't need to be biopsied, but that they'll stay intact, and it ultimately would be safer for their embryos. So that's the end of the presentation, but I would love to be able to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Brandon, for wonderful presentation. It was very nice. Thank you once again.
Of course.
So I'd like to open for comments and questions. Maria Eugênia, Luiz, querem comentar alguma coisa? Se alguém tiver alguma dúvida e não tiver muito domínio do inglês, manda para a gente aqui nas questões que a gente vai responder. Tá? Aliás, a gente encaminha para ele, sem problema nenhum. Brandon, I just have a first question. Of course, probably the question all the people here have in mind. So the NICs, right, that you call right now for this test. So this, after your presentation, seems like this test is ready to replace the traditional PGT-A, right? Mm-hmm. And what your opinion right now? So you need, of course, more publication about that, especially comparing the entire embryo, right? Like you show you here, is very nice. So tell us about that. So usually the IVF clinics around the world are using in routine this kind of technology, or they just start right now and see what the outcome?
No, so the paper that I showed that was published by Catherine, that was one of the papers that has been published. We've actually published 4 other papers that are doing similar comparison studies, and then one that was 413 embryos where we tracked the clinical outcome as well and showed an improved clinical outcome. And that paper was published, I think, maybe 4 or 5 months ago. So I can send that to you, and I can make sure that you have it. But there's clinics all over the world now that have implemented this and are using it clinically to replace the traditional PGT-A. And they've all seen great success with it. And with each clinic that we've worked with, we work with them to with the lab in their area to make sure that the culture media, the culturing process is followed correctly. And we usually will do a test run to make sure that everything works the way that it's supposed to. But we've seen great success implementing this clinically, and not just as research, but using it for real patients.
Yeah, it's great. Maria Eugênia, you need to turn on your microphone.
Okay, now. Thank you, Brandon. It was very, very nice, and I'm really impressed in how quick was it, because the first paper was 2026, is it? 4 years ago.
Correct.
And we have a lot of things happening so quick. I have actually 2 questions. First of all, do you think really we are breaking away from the old model, or do you believe that we still will have any situation or any clinic situation that we will need old techniques? We will need to biopsy.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. So yeah, the first paper we published was in 2016, and then we spent the past those 3 years between 2016 and 2019 refining the protocols and creating new versions of the reagents, which have allowed us to now publish these new papers and has actually made the non-invasive technology ready for clinical usage. So I think that we are at a point now where clinics can confidently choose to use non-invasive PGTA, if they want to use it. I don't think it's at a point anymore where people have to wonder if it works or not, because we have ample data showing that it works, and we've had pregnancies all over the world as a result of this technology. So I think that we're getting to a point now where clinics and clinicians can feel comfortable using the technology. And there are still instances, though, where the old methodologies of the TE biopsies can still applies. There are in situations where maybe if clinics are still culturing embryos together, non-invasive PGTA doesn't work if you culture embryos together. It has to be separate. So for clinics that don't want to culture embryos separately, the non-invasive technology wouldn't be able to be used. I think that there are some situations where we've seen clinics who have tried to implement the technology and have continually had contamination in the culture and media, in the control. And so there are some situations where certain practices may not lend themselves to using non-invasive PGTA, but we are at a point where I think non-invasive really is replacing the traditional biopsies. And it's just really a matter of whether or not the clinics choose to do that, and if they feel comfortable with using a new technology.
Yes, but how about the talking about the flow? How were we supposed to work? Each lab should work by himself, or by itself, or we should send the material to some specific places.
Yeah. So what we're doing is we're working with labs in different areas of the world to set the lab up to do the sequencing and deliver the reports. So like we're working with DASA to implement the technology at DASA, which is how I got introduced here to be part of this presentation, to where clinics can be trained to collect the culture media, and then you send the culture media to the laboratory, and at the laboratory the test is performed just like you would with TE biopsies now, the same thing, but you wouldn't send biopsies, you would send the culture media.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Thank you.
Just clarifying, Brandon. Então é assim, Maria Eugênia, a gente tem a parceria com eles de transferência de tecnologia, né? Então vai ser feito, a análise é feita no Brasil mesmo, com a tecnologia deles, em cloud, né? Quer dizer, na verdade a análise é feita por eles, porque ainda continua ligado, né? A análise é feita, não sei se é na China, in China or US, right, Brandon? The analysis will be done in.
Yes, the analysis is done in the US. Yeah, we have it's a cloud bioinformatics system. That's housed in the US.
Yeah.
Mas então eles mantêm a propriedade da tecnologia.
Exato.
E o laboratório manda para eles e recebe.
Exatamente.
Dizer, o laboratório vai comprar a tecnologia.
Não, a gente fez parceria com transferência de tecnologia, como já existe aqui no Brasil, né? E vai oferecer esses testes às clínicas no Brasil, então eles seriam enviados a São Paulo, aí pertinho de onde vocês estão, né? Aí em Moema, no NTO da Genuine. O mais importante disso tudo é o treinamento do embriologista, que é o que eu vou questioná-lo agora, né? Brandon, talking a little more about the trainee for the embryologist. You know, that's probably the most important step. Right. To be everything clear in the lab, right? So talk about a little more about that. So of course you have courses about that and hands-on, right? For the embryologists, but of course, when you increase a lot of sensibility of some technique, so of course, sometimes the problem is source of contamination from any of kind, right? So you need to be, it's need to be important that the embryologist needs to be very clear and in the lab, right? So talk a little bit more about that. So.
Sure. So yeah, it's very important that the embryologists follow the specific culturing protocols. So we have very well written and well defined protocols that can be followed in the lab, and we will work with each clinic to train the embryologists on the process that they need to follow. It's actually not a very it doesn't introduce a lot of change. We haven't really had any complaints from any clinics to say this is too much work. It actually is less work because you're not having to perform the biopsy. So we've found that clinics are very receptive to making the change and actually welcome. If a clinic if a clinic is willing to, if a clinic wants to make a change to use non-invasive PGTA, we've seen that everybody's very receptive to making that change. So we really don't see a lot of pushback or difficulty with the implementation process. But what does happen is when we train a lab to do an embryology lab, there's always some adjustments that need to be made. Like maybe after their first run, they realized they could have done something more efficiently, or maybe they discovered there was contamination in the sample. We'll work with the embryologist through the whole process to make sure that what you're doing is successful, and we'll help troubleshoot issues. We don't just send you kits and say good luck. You know, we help walk you through the whole process. And also for clinics that are new clinics, we've been able to work with groups like New Hope Fertility in New York, and their doctors have actually joined into trainings and helped provide feedback and advice. So we're creating a very good community of people who have perfected this process. And so everybody is in very good hands because we can all learn from the expertise of other clinics who have successfully done this.
Great, great.
O Adelino colocou aqui no grupo, desculpa te interromper, Luiz.
Claro, é isso mesmo, é isso que eu ia falar.
Então pronto, 6 meses trabalhando já com a tecnologia, você consegue comentar, Ciro?
Sobre, desculpa, o Manujeta.
O Adelino acabou de colocar para a gente que eles estão trabalhando há 6 meses, que eles têm 2 gestações ongoing e o primeiro nascimento no serviço do Franco Júnior. Quer dizer, eu não imaginava que o pessoal já estivesse caminhando a passo largo realmente, né?
Aqui a gente já teve alguns casos, né? Enfim, o Franco é um que iniciou tudo isso. Meu orientador, tem muito carinho por ele, sempre idealizou muito essa parte genética, né? A questão toda, né, Marugine, só ainda é essa história, né? Rotina ou não, recomendações. Obviamente é importante salientar que quando o paciente nos procura ainda, né? Principalmente, eu queria comentar um pequeno detalhe, porque assim, quando a gente trabalha com esse tipo de tecnologia, a gente trabalha com o que a gente chama de reads, leituras dos fragmentos de DNA, né? E quanto maior o número desses reads, maior a nossa resolução, pegando pequenas deleções até talvez, enfim, estou falando de uma forma geral. E levando em consideração isso, o menor cromossomo que nós temos, Maria Eugênia, é o cromossomo 21. E o cromossomo 21 possivelmente é o que pode mais passar desapercebido. A gente ainda não tem, como a gente comentou, tem muitos estudos, tal, etc. Então, é muito promissor, mas quando o paciente ainda quer ter certeza atualmente, a gente ainda vai para a biópsia de tronfectoderma, né? Quando o paciente quer ter mais certezas, né? Porque é a rotina, é o gold standard ainda, né? Mas eu vejo com muito bons olhos isso, né? Em um futuro próximo, que principalmente pela rotina, você viu que é uma rotina mais enxuta, né, para o embriologista, isso é um ponto importante. Brenda will talk about the routine, right? That's a short workflow in the lab,
Yes.
right? So more friendly for the embryologist. So that's a good point, right?
It is. It is. I mean, the whole process is easy. You know, it's not a difficult workflow. There's nothing confusing about it. One of the changes that takes place is, you know, you have to use new pipettes for each sample, and that's one thing that's a bit different than you may be used to doing. But when the samples are then sent to the laboratory to be tested, that even the laboratory staff who's performing the test has less work to do, and ultimately gives a quicker turnaround time on results. So the process is easier for everyone at the clinic,
Yeah.
and also at the laboratory level, and it ultimately delivers faster results, and there's less manual processes because you're really shortening the workflow from the clinic level and at the lab.
Okay.
Mas, bom, queria agradecer o Adelino por participar aí com a gente, né? O Adelino de Brasília, já com alguns casos feitos lá. Obrigado, Adelino. Brayton,
I have some question.
yes, go ahead.
Breno, congratulations for your presentation.
Thank you.
I have some questions here. Well, the first one, let's go here from Edson Borges, Professor Edson Borges, good friend of us. They ask you, it is correct to say that embryos with worse morphology or those euploids have less activity and release less DNA in the culture medium?
That's actually a very good question. So I don't have the slide in this presentation. I have to search to find it, but we actually did a study that looked at the ploidy status of the embryo related to the amount of DNA that was in the culture media. We didn't look at the morphological status, but we did look at the ploidy status, and we saw there was no concordance. So there was no correlation between whether or not an embryo is aneuploid and whether or not it had enough DNA in the culture media. There were some cases where a 46XX embryo had over 10 picograms of DNA in the culture media, but then there were cases where a highly mosaic embryo had no DNA in the culture media. So we actually haven't seen a correlation inversely or anything. There seems to be no correlation between the ploidy status and the DNA in the spent culture media. As far as morphological status, I don't know. I will find out if we've done any of those comparisons, but I know the ploidy status compared to the culture media is that there's no correlation.
Okay, thank you. And another one is how much medium you need to cultivate the embryo? How much medium? How the volume to culture the medium?
Typically, the ideal amount is 20 microliters. Okay. That's the ideal amount, and we don't really want more than 20 is ideal, but more than 30 dilutes the DNA too much. So okay. 20 is really the ideal amount.
Okay, it is in a specific dish, right? Or any, you can go.
It can really be any dish, as long as the embryos are cultured separately. It can be any culture media. It doesn't have to be a specific type of culture media. The only requirement is that you can't add extra HSA to the media through the culturing process, because that can throw the results off. HSA is fine, you just can't add extra.
Okay, thanks. I have another question for Silmara, and she is asking if there's a need to do the hatching, assist the hatching or not.
No, it's not
That's
required.
A good question, right?
Yeah.
About the entire DNA, right, Brayton? I would like to add some information. So when you do the hatching in day 3, of course you have more amount of DNA in the medium, right? So probably have more specific result. That I've been reading about that. So that's right. What do you think about?
Sir, I'm trying to correct my I don't know if there's something wrong with my speaker or what. I couldn't hear the question. There's an echo. I'm trying to turn up the volume on my speaker here. Maybe this
No problem, no problem. So about the hatching, Brandon, so you know that when you have the hatching in D3, right?
Mhm.
So we have the liquid from blastocell, right? So
Correct.
that's increased the amount of DNA on the medium.
It does.
Have more specific results when you do that, or you don't need to do the hatching?
You don't need to.
Okay.
You don't need to. Yeah, we recommend collapsing the embryo, at least collapsing the embryo. But if you don't do assisted hatching, that's okay. We do recommend the collapsing though, because then it allows you to collect the culture media on day 5. But if you wait until day 6, then there's actually, 97% of the time, there's enough DNA in the culture media anyways. So the collapsing just allows you to collect it a day earlier. And it does allow for the collapsing and Sierra, I think you're muted. Can't hear you.
No.
So I have a question about embryoscope, time lapsing. Andrea Mesquita Lima asked about there is any validation for NICs when you have the embryoscope? You have any different way to do the workflow way?
No, that's a good question. So right now, you can use the embryoscope. You just have to take it out. You have to take the embryos out of the embryoscope at a certain stage, and not let them culture the entire time in the embryoscope. You can allow them to be in the embryoscope in the beginning, and then you can take them out and change the culture media out and perform the culturing process, and then use the embryoscope for the rest of the process. That's really up to the clinic of how they would want to perform that. I know New Hope Fertility actually does that. They use the embryoscope. So they'd actually be a really good resource. If anybody is using an embryoscope and wants to use NICs, they would be able to help you, to help talk with you and talk through that process with you.
Dr. Brander, I have a question from Silmara, and she is asking for, it's possible to transfer in the same cycle, but we need to cryopreserve it.
It is possible to transfer in the same cycle. It requires the way that it's possible is if you can collapse. You would collapse the embryo or perform assisted hatching, and collect the culture media earlier. Collect the culture media on day 4, day 5, even, and it reduces the success rate to about 80 to 85%. But you still could have enough DNA in the culture media if you collect it earlier. You would then allow the embryo to continue culturing, and you would have to send the culture media to the laboratory. Because of the shortened workflow with the non-invasive PGTA that we have, it is possible to get results in less than 24 hours, in the same day. What we have seen is that for clinics who are doing that, transferring in the same cycle, they've created a program that is more expensive, but that's because if you want to do that, the laboratory has to guarantee that if you send in a sample that's for a patient that wants to be transferred in the next couple days, the laboratory has to agree that they will always run those samples. But that means that the laboratory may not have a full run, which means that it would be more expensive to run a sample like that. So that's something that you can actually negotiate with the laboratory to say, hey, I want to have this option. How can we make it possible? But because of this technology, you can get results on the same day. So it's something that has to be worked out with the laboratory and the clinic, but it's possible, where with other technologies, it's not.
Okay, thank you. And I have another one. It's possible to have a amplification failure. And what do we need to do in this case? So if you have some amplification.
Have an amplification failure, you said?
Yeah. Yeah.
It is possible to have an amplification failure. Most of the time with the amplification failures, it's because of a insufficient starting volume or insufficient starting material. That's usually what we see is, we perform QC and we can determine whether or not there was enough DNA in the culture media to even start with. And in the case in the case of amplification failure, that's usually what the reason is. We actually have success about 20% of the time with DNA with samples that have as little as 1 picogram of DNA. So we can work with very low amounts of DNA, but the more DNA, the better. But what we've seen is that for clinics who have amplification failure or who have a low starting volume, if you thaw those embryos and reculture them for 24 hours and then perform the test again, that vitrification, the thawing process actually allows there to be sufficient DNA in the culture media again, and then we can rerun those samples and we get success 100% of the time in those situations.
Thank you.
Of course.
Gente, enviem mais perguntas. Vamos aproveitar que o Brandon está aí. Então, sobre o mesmo ciclo, sim, é possível. Como ele mostrou, o workflow ele é mais enxuto que, inclusive, que uma análise de PGTA, né? Então, o procedimento seria o mesmo que a biópsia, que é transferida 24 horas depois. Então, seria possível, sim, a transferência de embrião a fresco. Mais alguma pergunta aqui?
Cryopreserved embryos.
Pode fazer, Luiz, pode ir.
It's possible to do this in cryopreserved embryo. That how long need to be the medium culture to send?
Actually, all of the validation paper that Catherine published, those were all on cryopreserved embryos. They were just thawed and recultured for 24 hours.
Para Ciomara, que perguntou se quando ele fala collapse embryo, é isso mesmo. Na verdade, é a biópsia ali, né? Não sei se essa é a pergunta, o Luiz também pode me ajudar, mas é feito o hatching D3, e aí o embrião colapsa, né? Para ir a D5, e nesse momento vaza líquido da blastocele. Isso alguns trabalhos mostraram em aumento da especificidade, mas como ele falou, no caso deles, aí eles já conseguiram dar uma boa padronização, não há necessidade. Quer comentar, Luiz, sobre o collapse embryo aí?
Não, é que ela confundiu o embrião compactado com colapsado. O colapsado você causa através do hatching, né? E o compactado é o embrião que está numa fase de multiplicação celular, em que existe uma compactação, que seria a mórula, né? Não é o caso. Seria um
quarto dia ali, né?
Exatamente, seria um blastocisto, acredito eu, né? Que foi feito o hatching e ele colapsou.
Maria Eugênia, mais alguma coisa?
Não, eu tô satisfeita aqui. Tô pensando bastante.
It's called a brainstorm.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Bom, se a gente não tem mais perguntas e a Maria Eugênia e o Luiz Eduardo concordarem, a gente encerra, então, a sessão. Queria, de coração, agradecer a todos que participaram, todos que enviaram perguntas, toda a equipe aí, Cromossome.
Desculpa, Ciro, a gente teve 85 participantes, foi bem bom.
Sim, os interessados, né? Se a gente olhar esse horário agora, internet e lives que está acontecendo, né? São de dezenas, né? Quer dizer, as pessoas hoje é um modo de comunicação, né? Mas eu queria agradecer. A gente deve, nesse formato, fazer uma nova aula o mês que vem, né, Luiz e Margina? O que vocês acham?
Eu acho
ótimo,
perfeito.
não, vamos fazer. A ideia é a gente fazer uma nova apresentação, que nós vamos estudar ainda, né, Ciro, o que nós vamos fazer, mas toda última quinta-feira do mês, às 19 horas, última quinta-feira do mês. Essa é a ideia. Então,
enviem sugestões, né, para que a gente...
todos que estão presentes, todos que estão presentes, que querem algum tema, ou alguém que queira falar, ou alguém que queira apresentar alguma coisa interessante ou que vai ajudar, claro que tudo é interessante para a gente, por favor, é só ligar para a gente, para o Ciro, para mim, enfim, colocar no nosso grupo, enfim, e a gente vai fazer com o maior prazer a gente poder conversar sem dúvida nenhuma.
Maravilha. Brandon, once again, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you for having me.
Probably we'll see you soon.
Great.
For any questions, when you could have how can I say to see personally, right? So right now,
I hope so soon.
Yeah. So you come to Brazil and you make like a course for the embryologists. Probably you have a course on the Brazilian Congress, right?
Yeah, that would be great.
So that's a nice opportunity to learn.
Yes.
In November?
I think it's the
August, right?
The date in September, something end of September.
Something like that.
Reprodução assistida. Então, gente, oficialmente a gente encerra. Queria agradecer a todos a presença, a paciência. Enviem perguntas, sugestões. Para mim foi um grande prazer estar com vocês. Acredito que da Maria Eugênia e Luiz também. Forte abraço. Thanks once again, Brandon.
Muito obrigado.
Boa noite. Have a nice night.
Boa noite, obrigada. Boa noite.
Obrigado.
Um abraço para vocês, um abraço para todos.